Men rising up to end the silence around us about the chains that bind us, to dispel the darkness of illusion with luminous spiritual technologies, to finally become the hero within us all. This is the final episode of 2021 Arise the Honest Man's podcast, episode 52. It is also a celebration of sorts. It is an important milestone for us, having reached 1 year of this endeavor. I think Jai and myself never really imagined how meaningful it would be for us, and the incredible appreciation and feedback that we would receive from our listeners. So it is quite a momentous occasion for us, and also, we decided it would only be fitting to make this final episode also quite a momentous topic: 108 Shades of Grey. So a little bit earlier this year, I'm not sure, it was close to the beginning of the year, maybe Feb, March sometime, Brajananda, Prabhu and I were having a conversation, and we were just connecting about all sorts of things, and we began talking about this realm of sexuality within our society. And somehow or other, this idea was born. I think Brajananda Prabhu actually said, wouldn't it be really cool to come up with some sort of questionnaire and put it out there to see where people are really at? Because you get a sense by having, continuous extended conversations. You get a sense, but like we kind of wanted to know for sure what's going on out there. And needless to say, it took maybe 2-3 months or whatever for it to actually come into reality. And of course, Jai Jagannath Prabhu was going to be a part of it. Brajananda had shared the idea with his dear wife Kumari, sitting right there next to him, and she also expressed some enthusiasm about being involved. And then I also thought, well, we have to have Dhanya. We have to have Dhanya because she's so incredibly in touch on so many levels, and she always contributes such value to any space that I've shared with her. She's just made such an impact. So yeah, we had to have Dhanya. And we then proceeded, and we'll kind of get into the technicalities of how the whole thing became what it is in just a sec. But I'll hand over to my beloved co-host Jai Jagannath Prabhu to get into some other aspects.
Yeah, and I just wanted to start off, and sorry guys for the call. I'm not trying to be extra like Hollywood. I'm just someone left. We had a winter summer here for like a few days, and someone left the window open, and now it's like winter. So it's super cold in the space I'm in right now, and so I'm not trying to like be Hollywood or anything, but it's just a matter of practicality here. I wanted to start off with love. Thank you all for being here. I'm excited about this episode, nervous about it also a little bit, but there was in one of the questionnaires, someone mentioned that this was the way that we had, I guess, the questions themselves in the survey was ethically problematic. And I kind of wanted to just springboard from there, or use it as a springboard to just discuss our motivations for having this conversation. I for starters, just want to say, and I'm probably going to come back to this a few times throughout this conversation. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, every endeavor is covered by some fault, as fire is covered by smoke. So there were, areas where things could have been better, more precise, et cetera, et cetera. But our motivation for doing the conversation was just to have a conversation. These conversations we may have in private with one or two persons, we were thinking maybe we could have it more and open, and that way perhaps reach more ears, and may it work as a sort of palliative, or like a palliative might be a proper word here, for hearts who are struggling with the subject matter, both personally and communally. as the survey also tended to reveal. This is like a weird subject matter. It's a very awkward one for sure. And so yeah, I kind of wanted to just to use that as a springboard. How did you feel about that particular, the statement, like the ethics of the question? We're not scientists, we're not data analysts, and that wasn't our purpose in putting the questionnaire together. It was literally like, let's have a conversation. And here's the questionnaire. It's completely anonymous, so we don't know who is who. And you didn't have to like participate in the conversation like that. It was just like, if you wanted to help contribute to the conversation, that would be great. So I just wanted to get that off my chest and hear you all's thoughts just on that particular thing real quick. Like, what did you think about the ethics of the survey?
It wasn't so evident to me what exactly was so ethically problematic, since it was completely voluntary and since it was completely anonymous. And, like Krishna gave us the gift of free will. So you can decide, if you want to be a part of it. So yeah, to me, it's actually a little confusing.
Yeah.
Like, what's the big deal?
Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it was, I also received some feedback. It wasn't I think the word ethical might be very specific, and I also have a hard time applying it. I think that if there's like informed consent, right? We talked about what it was, and perhaps what we could have done is further clarify the purpose and how the information was going to be used. But I thought it was pretty well laid out, that we were looking to start a conversation. And we talked a little bit about this previously when we met, which is we're just looking to explore. It's not necessarily like a scientific experiment where we're setting up a certain measure and that measure has internal validity and reliability, and then we're applying it to a specific, set population that's the sample set. We're not doing any of that. It's fully exploratory. It's something that's meant to be, as you said, a conversation starter. And because it's groundbreaking, I mean, if you think about what groundbreaking sounds like, it's literally breaking ground. It's going to make a mess a little bit. So I think that's sort of what is happening here. It does get a little messy. You kind of see the materials out in the open, and it can be a little bit kind of button pushing some of the questions as it's meant to be. I think that a little discomfort in my professional and also in my personal experience, a little bit of discomfort actually helps the juices get flowing and actually helps information come out, because you see where there's points of friction and where there's points of contention. And the fact that someone challenges the ethics around sexuality, I mean, ethics is a big topic around sex. So it's relevant, even though I don't fully understand what it means. I can see the relevance of it. And yeah, I appreciate the feedback.
Nice.
Yeah, and on this aspect of free will, the only 3 questions that were required were the first 3 qualifying questions to make sure that you were some sort of devotee, that you were in a relationship so that you have a context to speak from. And what was the other one? Yeah, I knew that you're in a relationship. Yeah, and that you've been in the movement. So like those were the only required questions. And then you didn't have to respond. If you felt a question was, ethically problematic, no problem. Leave it out. Skip it. Go to the next one.
Which plenty of people did. Like,
yes.
Okay, so we had about 83 people, and we divided the 83 between the 5 of us. Although we ended up reading most of them, we divided it. And the section that I got, 1 through 17, like no one said anything. It was like literally I was like, oh my God, I'm behind. And I was just like, okay, nothing. So to your point, no one had to answer anything. Although I did find it quite strange how people like answered the first 3 or 4 questions and then had nothing else to say. In any case, just to the aspect of free will, Kumari, let's hear from you, because you came up with the questions, and the questions left little to the imagination. I remember being in New Brindavan for 24-hour kirtan earlier this year, and there was some friends I was with there who had seen the survey and participated, and they were also just like taking it back, but kind of happily taking it back, but they were joking about it. Like, some of the questions were like, we're like, oh, are we gonna talk about that? That's also getting brought up. So we
Yeah.
want to hear from you. How did you come? First of all, thank you for doing the questions. I don't know if it would have ever materialized if not for you. So your presence in this whole process has been critical. Thank you for that. And what was going on in your head when you came out with these questions? Yeah.
Just very briefly, I also just want to say, for those who may be listening and may not be 100% like fully acquainted with the social culture within the greater bhakti society, is that in a public space there ain't no bedroom talk. It doesn't happen. Sex is highly, highly, highly taboo. Reason being that our ideal standards are really, really high and rigid, you know? And so when people fall short, then the kind of thing is like, well, you just don't want to go there, because automatically, as a result, so much guilt and shame is then created or catalyzed by this reality. So in one sense, I don't know if anyone has in our society up to this point today actually had a straight up like public conversation about this topic. So I think, in that spirit, maybe Kumari, you can say what happened for you, but maybe we might as well go balls to the wall. We if we're gonna do this, we might as well do it properly.
As in creating the survey, I was even nervous because I kept coming up with more questions, and I'm like, is it too long? Is it too much? Is it too detailed? And all the feedback that I got from this team that you're seeing here was like, no, like, everything there has got to be asked. Like, we got to put it out there, and you already came up with it, so let's do it. And I'm like, okay. So I think what was really important was to give people just like text boxes, like write, like elaborate, describe, and then along with collecting more like rate on a scale, because those kind of in between questions don't burn out people when they're just writing about their sex life. And I think opening up with the describe what sex means to you. So this is like the first question, very broad. And this got a lot of varied answers, sometimes straight into the point, sometimes more abstract. So I think that just opening up with that open-ended question was really important in kind of trying to let people just start writing, start sharing, and then as they're starting to share, and then we talk about standards. So now standards, it was like, what is your current sexual standard? What was your sexual standard before you were married? Or if you're not married, then the question doesn't apply. And like, what is your long-term vision for your sexual standard? And I think that actually when we were doing our Grihasta vision questions before we got married, there was a question about sex, and it talks about sexual standards and like what you think, and like that needs to be talked about before you enter into a serious relationship. And I remember, of course, my husband is the researcher, so he reached out to a mentor of his who gave him essentially the standards that are in these questions. So like the different levels essentially. Like I'm completely detached from sex life. Right. Okay. And then I only have sex for procreation. I only have sex with a marriage, or like I have premarital sex. So that kind of was the, I guess, the inspiration for those specific questions. But then, those were multiple choice questions. But then it's like, okay, but what is your long-term vision? Write out, free response. Like, tell us where you're at and where you want to go and how you want to go forward. And Yeah, and then rating satisfaction in your sex life and how often you're having sex. Like, these are things that are important. Like, how often are devotee couples having sex? Like, I don't know. So let's talk about it. And then I think where a lot of people kind of were like, okay, this is specific, was kind of essentially going through the bases, so to speak.
Yeah, like okay, it's gonna get a little weird, but yeah, the question about fellatio, I was just like, oh,
That works.
oh. I was like, okay.
So
Wait a second. I feel like a doofus right now. What does fellatio mean?
Oh my god, I'm trying to keep it like
Google
sophisticated.
it.
Nah, bro. Okay, listen. No. I'm gonna say this. Okay, there was one question. When was the first time in your relationship that you engaged in oral sex?
Yeah, that's fellatio.
That's
Yes.
fellatio.
Okay, excellent. I thought so because that particular question, like we, one senior individual gave the feedback that like, oh my gosh, like when you ask that question, then it just makes me think of all the times that happened, and that's like agitating to the mind. People had these kinds of
sure.
feelings. Mm.
Yeah, so how did you get what inspired you to put, like, I wouldn't think that a devotee, even trying to be provocative, would think to put a question like that down just because it's, yeah, I don't know, because it is what it is.
Dhanya said something really good about this when we were discussing it,
Yeah, Dhanya,
as we
what do
were
you-
getting feedback.
please.
I don't
Do you
remember. What did
remember
I
you
say? I
said,
don't know.
Dhanya? You basically said this, right? Like, so Kumari, what was the? Hold on, is my sound coming through? Okay, are you guys?
Yeah.
Fine.
It's good.
Okay, cool. Kumari, what was the progression exactly? It was something like. What was the first time that you hugged, and then what was the first time that you kissed? What was the first time you had your chest touched, or like touched chest or whatever? Then it was below the belt, and then it was oral sex, and then it was actual full-on intercourse, right? So
Right.
what was the timeline? And when I brought this particular feedback that we received, like, why do you have to be so direct about it? Because if you're direct,
Right.
then like it just reminds the thing. And then Dhanya said, well, this is the reality. Like, this is what is happening for people in the bedroom. And like, if you don't explicitly state it as it is, then you're denying it as a valid, like, real experience that is being had.
I remember Dhanya saying
That is part
but-
of like, the human. I mean, because it's like, come on, guys, like we all know, like, what happens behind the door. Like, we all know, come on, like, why do we have to be all hush hush about it? So in stating it explicitly, you render it a valid, real thing that is happening for people that they can
Right.
just admit to, and not have to feel like all, tail between the legs and shameful about.
Right. I totally
Yeah.
remember when you said that, Dhanya. It was
Okay.
very.
I think I might have.
assuring.
I think that was in our chat. But yeah, we were
Yeah.
talking about the wording around the questions and wanting to be as straightforward as possible, because an issue is that there isn't straightforward language around it. And so the difficulty with euphemism is that implicit in a euphemism, or implicit in sort of vague language, is that feeling of what I'm talking about is inherently shameful. There's something wrong with what I'm doing. Right. And so, it's nice to just be straightforward about it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything vulgar about it, because it's the tone. It's the tone. I think that in being straightforward and using also language that people understand, right? Maybe if you use a euphemism, it doesn't translate culturally. Maybe if you use certain very like scientific terms, people don't know what that means. That's not how sex education. There's not even really one global understanding of sex education. So the language around it, the more straightforward, the more simple, the more accessible it is, just makes for a better question because it allows you to have your answer rather than to start getting triggered by the feelings of a question.
And also just in terms of like language and validation, all the questions are phrased, how long were you in your relationship before this happened? So not did this happen or when did this happen? Like, okay, this has happened probably for you because you're in a relationship. So how long were you in your relationship before? Not did you do this? Because a yes or no might be like, oh no, I'm going to say no because I don't want people to know that I did it. But like, how long were you in your relationship before? Oh, just a few months, whatever. So just even the wording there kind of lended toward this is valid in your relationship when like how long were you in your relationship before it happened?
Bravo. So you can see a lot went into these very simple questions. A lot of thinking, contemplation, and trying to create a space where people could be vulnerable and honest at the same time. I wanted to start exploring some of the themes that we saw. Oh,
yeah. Just a sec. So also like what another thing that should be said is, right in the beginning when we'd first put the questionnaire out there, we were certainly receiving quite a lot of feedback, and as we were receiving the feedback, we brought the feedback to each other and we were discussing it in our little group and so on, and we still all like universally agreed that the way that it was done and the way that we had approached it was a valid, necessary, and sensible approach. So thanks for the feedback, guys. But like, we felt that it was good. And we did receive a lot of also a lot of affirmation. Like there was a little bit of outcry, but there was also a lot of like genuine appreciation.
Yeah, I remember a few people wrote, thanks for asking these questions. I'm glad we're having a discussion around it. One person said, no one's ever asked me before. Like, thank you for asking. As simple as that. It's like just to be able to talk about it for them was very therapeutic. And then what the survey went to next after that part was like, how do you feel? Did you feel it was too slow? Like, did your physical relationship escalate too slow? Good timing, or was it too fast? Right. So then you have devotees like reflecting on like how did you feel about that? And a lot of people wrote like it was too fast. Some people
that's
like some people was like way too slow. Right. So it's nice, and then people were able to introspect and about how they feel about that. And yeah, I know I felt like a lot of people felt like it was very therapeutic just to reflect on that.
I definitely got the sense from a lot of the answers that a lot of these people had been sitting, like had literally been waiting for years and years, maybe even decades, to be able to just say something about this like inner struggle, around their sexuality and spiritual life. So yes, it was definitely felt it was very cathartic. And then Jai, just before we go on to the themes, just two more realms that Kumari had, thought really well about, inquiring into was essentially porn use and the extent of porn use and how that may potentially influence the way that sex is being had. Literally like the mechanics, like does it influence the way that you have sex with your partner? Because we all know that a very skewed, unwholesome, exploitative portrayal of sex is being shown in pornography in general. So that was important to inquire about. And then also there was also a set of questions on contraception. Do you use contraception? What kind of contraception? And do you believe that it's okay for Hare Krishnas to use contraception? So that was basically, and then what was the last thing? Just basically, if you had any final thoughts or any,
right.
And we got some real nuggets there for sure. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, if we can get into some of the themes, I want to kick it off, and I want to see if you guys can affirm this or not, but the first thing that I saw that really stood out for me was that the way men and women experience sexuality is very different. At least the way that they talk about it is very different. And if the way they talk about it is any indication of how they think or experience sexuality, for me, it seemed like a very, I wouldn't say a stark contrast, but like a contrast enough where you could see, like, wow, men and women experience sexuality very different. I remember I kind of saw from a lot of the female surveys, there was a lot of the sense that a lot more like talk of detachment from sex life, or not being so much into it, but recognizing it as a need for my husband or as a need for my partner. Like I felt like I saw a lot more of that from the side of the female, and therefore I'll acquiesce to the needs of my husband even though I'm not so into it. And then I saw a lot more like, yeah, more of like a need or necessity on the male side. Like this is something that has to be there, and maybe it's not so much there, and it's kind of making a weird awkward strain in our relationship. In any case, there was a lot of different elements that came up, but one thing was for sure is that men and women experience sexuality very differently. And I think the question that came up for me is that in our postmodern world, in talking about sexuality, the lines between genders have been blurred. First of all, that might be offensive. Is there even a gender binary anymore? Sidebar. This first question was like, are you male or female? And the second question was, what's your gender? So that we got some real funny ones. We got some real funny responses in those two questions, because even asking this sort of question, like, wait, didn't you just ask me that in the previous question? So in our postmodern culture where the gender binary isn't so clear anymore, and the way that that whole idea that men and women can experience sexuality differently is kind of being blurred more and more and more. And so maybe it's taken for granted that we the different genders, we do experience sexuality like very differently. And I don't know if we consciously know that. And so when entering into a relationship without consciously knowing that, is going to very much impact the way that you engage in your sexuality with the partner. So I don't know. I just kind of wanted to hear that was one thing that really stood out to me, like, because I was noting it, how men spoke about sex, how women spoke about, and it was like, it seemed very different to me. And I was like, okay, it seems like this is important to know that we do experience sexuality very differently, and we need to be aware of that difference so that we can approach our partners appropriately for a more healthy exchange in consideration of our needs and their needs.
There were a lot of people that that essentially had this, that came to this conclusion in their own experience, that like dealing with sexuality needs to be a highly collaborative endeavor in the couple. Like it needs to be like, we need to be really, really honest about our needs. And it's like, we need to figure this out together. We need to have those like very honest, because otherwise, you know, this obviously this rift is there, like between how women tend to feel and how men tend to feel. So the only way that you're going to find out is to have those conversations and actually tell each other where you're genuinely at, and what you're really feeling and what you're really needing. And there were a few people that, you know, that basically said that's the point that they had come to, and only after coming to this point of having these conversations did they really begin to find like a sense of harmony in dealing with their sexuality. Because yeah, it's just it's so it's just so tricky, you know. If one partner has a much higher libido than the other, then, you know, you can feel, I can imagine you can feel so apprehensive about bringing that to them, because, you know, there's this guilt around like, well, you know, am I just using this person that I'm supposed to love and therefore serve and whatever, just to satisfy my needs? But then of course a paradigm shift has to be made, and, you know, to some extent it's like, taking care of each other's needs is a form of service. Anyway, so it's obviously a very tricky conversation to have, but the only way to resolve it is to have that conversation.
Yeah. Thoughts? Men and women experience sex differently, or sexuality differently.
I was also noticing the answers on that. It seemed like the women wrote a little more about connection and feeling and just a little more emotional, I would say. And then a lot of the men's were like very like it's when you perform it's like more literal, like man and woman,
Very literal.
like.
And the question was, what does sex mean to you?
Yeah, like I shared this in the chat group. What does sex mean to you? One guy was just like intercourse.
Yeah, like there were a lot of answers like that. It's like when a man does this, and so it's very mechanical in a sense. I noticed a lot of the men. It's not all of them, I have to say. Not all.
Exactly.
There's some more like men who are more into the emotional aspect, and also talk about procreation, because not like a lot of people are like I also noticed like some people are saying only for procreation, and then some were like it doesn't have to necessarily be like that. So I wouldn't say that everyone definitely there was a wide range of answers. I wouldn't say that we're just asking one group of people. It was definitely a very broad audience, in my opinion. So, but that was my general feel that the women, their answers were more emotional and sensitive, and then the men's were very like, this is what it is.
Like literal, and also with a focus on pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that the differences in the masculine and feminine experience were there, and they were pretty obvious in the language. I think also a big component that I thought was notable was that kind of what you were saying, Jai, that like there are differences in the male experience and the female experience of sexuality, and that many people came to the relationship because one of the latter questions was kind of like, so when you came to your relationship, what was it like? Kind of speaking to your partner about that. Did you have a conversation about something along those lines?
Right.
That for some people, that was their first ever time contemplating like, what does sex mean to me? Right? It was like the first time they even had, like, it's not like they had a necessarily like a well-developed framework of like, this is what sex is. And then when I come to a relationship, this is what I want to present to my partner. It was just kind of like, I don't know, are they needs? Like one of the most frequent words, I wish I could, I don't know if you can do this in the info that we got, but to like scan for like hot words, like one word was confusing. People are confused. We are confused about sex. I feel confused. They were confused. It was confusing when we talked about it. It was confusing when it was happening. I was confused afterwards. I was like, I'm confused what Prabhupada would want. I'm confused what everybody else is doing. Like everybody, it's just, there's massive confusion. And it's because there's this like lack of communication. And even in relationships, there's an awkwardness. I think men and women seem to express a sort of like blossoming of the conversation when they finally get into a relationship where there's trust and where there's love, where they're like, I'm only just, I mean, even people who've been in a relationship for years are saying, I'm only just starting to have this conversation. And that was there around the topics of masturbation and pornography too, which is like, I've only been able to talk about this with my partner because they love me and because they accept me and because there's that compassion there of like, wow, you must, it seems like you're having a hard time figuring this out and so on. So there's something about people having a sexual relationship and that also creating some sort of safety where sex can actually be talked about because it's happening. I don't know that was a universal experience, but it was something really noticeable that I picked up on as people were kind of storying their experiences.
Interesting.
There's one particular male who gave an amazing answer to what does sex mean to you, and I'd like to share it as it is because it's there's no way of knowing who said it. and it was just so all-encompassing. I don't know if you guys maybe read it, but I just want to share it quickly. So describe what sex means to you. Biologically, an exchange of bodily fluids. Physically, one of the highest pleasures the body can have. Emotionally, an intimate connection with my wife. Mentally, sexual fantasies are a way to escape reality. I unfortunately use those to help me fall asleep. And spiritually, something I need to get over. Really,
Yeah,
really,
interesting.
really, really covering the basis. And that kind of demonstrates why people are so torn, because it's almost like, yes, you are not the body, you are the spirit soul, but our psycho-emotional experience is so real, and you got to do something with it, right? So you can see how people are really, really torn apart, not knowing how to reconcile these different aspects of being.
I definitely noticed that, and I have it here on my little sheet of themes, that I noticed that there were quite a few answers where they were very satisfied with the emotional and physical aspects of the relationship, but felt conflicted with the spiritual part of them. And there was like I noted it down because I started seeing it quite a bit. It was repeating itself, that I'm actually satisfied with the emotional and physical progression of the relationship. I feel kind of nourished by that, but because it's not in line with the spiritual standard as they understood it, there was like this discomfort and schism. So I was, since it came up naturally just now, did you all notice that also? What might be, yeah, I don't know. That seems like a pretty big problem when your highest ideals always keep you at odds with yourself, even when you feel satisfied with yourself as you are.
Did you notice, kind of riffing off of what you're saying, Jai, did you notice that some of the questions that didn't ask you about what the ideal was, people would slip it in there as the primer for their answer? Right? They'd be
Absolutely.
like, so what is, what is this like for you? And they'd be like, well, okay, I know what the highest standard is, and I know I'm supposed to be detached from sex life, but this is what. And so it's amazing because, like you said, if the language is any indication of the thought process,
Right.
it means that there's this wave of hitting you with the standard before you even contemplate your own experience, which I think can be extremely healthy in some ways.
Totally.
And in another way, it means that you have to like move through this dense fog of shame before you even touch base with yourself.
Right.
Right? Before you even get to what your actual experience is, you're kind of like mired by like, what I'm doing is wrong. I know this isn't the standard. I know blah, blah, blah. And it's a very, very heavy experience. And it's not like that came out of nowhere. A lot of people in the survey also talked about how that was passed down to them from a previous generation, how certain communities had really problematic language and really problematic attitudes toward one another about even developing the emotional aspects of their relationships, what to speak of the physical, sexual aspects of the relationship. So, yeah, I definitely noticed that certain trend was there of feeling this like disjoint between what I believe to be the purest spiritual standard and the fact that maybe I am actually satisfied and maybe this is actually really working for me, and I can also be kind of in knowledge of this higher principle that I'm also aspiring for. So how do I navigate that?
Right. Yeah. Kumari, you guys, I just wanted to say, I want to bring this up because it's a kind of a talking point that I have with many of my friends here in the city also. I don't know how else to say this, and it's going to sound somewhat controversial, but there is a difference between 4 regular principles and 16 rounds. And this is what I want to say about that. Like the 16 rounds is like bhakti proper, when you're actually engaged in bhakti. And the only way you can progress in bhakti is by doing the angas of bhakti. There's a nice verse from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu when he's thinking about the persons who have bhakti adhikar, esha bhakti adhikarinam. Then he says, ananushtana to dosho bhaktyanga prajayate. That for those who have bhakti adhikar, there's fault if they don't do the main angas of bhakti. But if they don't do Varnashram Dharma, Karanat, there is no fault. You know, and it's a major little section in the Adhikar aspect of BRS. And then he goes on to quote like several verses describing this like very clear distinction between bhakti proper and like the religious culture in which bhakti may have been encountered in India specifically in the previous world. And I don't know, I always felt like, for me at least, that was always a healthy distinction to keep in mind, because the way I was experiencing the question, this could just be my bias, that the two are getting like deeply conflated. And so unless you're following all the religious standards strictly, you can't advance in bhakti. That's how I was hearing that. And then feeling kind of like guilty about that I'm not going to really be able to move towards the goal of my life because I'm not following all these religious strictures deeply. Whereas with my understanding of bhakti, at least, and this is not me pissing all over the four regular principles. I'm just saying that you advance in bhakti by doing the actual angas of bhakti, Shravan, Kirtan, and so on. And if there is defect in the sort of social religious aspect of your life, that's not considered a defect or a fault per se. Just, you know, keep on with the bhakti, and then that's things will push out. So I was feeling kind of like this maybe needs to become more of a conversation of like that distinction, because otherwise it just felt like I'm satisfied with my emotional physical part and I can do bhakti, but because I don't have the strict religious standard, I'm not a bhakta, or I'm not fully a bhakta because of it. And I don't know, I just felt it almost as a theistic, like it's not correct. I don't know. Anyway, I wanted to put that out there because it just was impacting me in that way. I don't know. How do you hear that?
I think it makes a lot of sense, because we're saying that from a kind of like psychological point of view, and this is a question, it's a hypothesis. It's easier to be hard on ourselves and hard on others for not following regulations, or for not, respecting these kind of more social or religious things, than to actually confront the reality of I'm not in touch with my true nature of being a servant of Krishna and his Vaishnavas. That's so painful.
Right.
My distance from my true devotional nature, my soft heart, my total surrender of everything to Krishna is so far away that I would rather point that pain in this direction right here and just be like, I just can't get this reg down. I just can't. Right? I mean, we do that, right? When something is too painful, psychologically, we use a defense mechanism to pack it up and point that laser in a different direction.
Yeah.
Something that's easier to tackle, something that I can put on someone else or put on myself on a more superficial level. It's more okay for me to process that pain. And so I would ask, in addition to your question, kind of putting some layer on that question, is it that we are so afraid of how kind of far we are from how our devotional ideal, that we're getting stuck on these kind of superficial things because they're easier, they're more tangible, they're like material, literally.
Right.
Can I just say something? What you just said, I was having a conversation with a friend not too long ago, and we were talking about how we often confuse symptoms with the problem. So we're shaming ourselves because we think the symptom is the problem, but that's actually not the root of the problem. The root of the problem is like what you said. It's like we don't have the taste for our devotional service to Krishna and the Vaishnavas and that all, and then as a result, we have these symptoms, and then we're thinking that those symptoms is our problem, and we shame ourselves because of that, right? And so, yeah. Anyway, that's just something I was. Thinking from what you just said, it lines right up with my conversation that I was having.
Totally. Yeah, and then so the medicine, I mean, what Jai is saying from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the medicine is bhakti. The medicine is not more stringent with the regulation because the byproducts of bhakti are knowledge and detachment. So the detachment will come if you're practicing bhakti. It's not that the bhakti is going to come if you practice detachment.
Right.
We were just having, I teach a Bhakti Shastri class, and this morning we were discussing how Prabhupada says, it was about how Krishna is a taste in water, right? And so then Prabhupada says in this regard, if you're a drunkard and you're addicted to wine, then think when you drink a glass of wine that, oh, this is Krishna, it's so nice, right? So it's like, just see the mood there. It's like, yeah, you're gonna drink wine, so that's where you are, but think about Krishna, you know. And so we're gradually getting a taste, gradually getting a taste, gradually getting a taste.
Are you
He's not
saying-
shaming the guy for drinking the wine. You know what I'm saying? He's not
Yeah,
saying,
we're saying that drinking's okay. That's what we're saying, Kumari.
I was gonna say, are you saying that we should have sex and think about Krishna?
I
Is that your
actually
point?
well,
very
my point is focusing on the bhakti aspect, right? And that's why Krishna says he's sex life that is for procreation, right? For example. So ideally, we know, like, everyone in the survey said their long-term vision for their sex life is completely detached. Everyone said
Not
that.
everyone.
No?
No,
Really?
most-
Okay. Anyway, everyone I
A
read.
lot.
Majority.
maybe,
Yeah, the
maybe
majority.
like 80%.
Majority.
I would say
Yeah.
everyone I read was like, it was, you know,
Clear.
we all read the books. We all have the idea, like, that's where we should be, right? That's my point. So then it's like, we're not in denial about that in general, I would say, right?
Mm.
We're not,
Just
Yeah.
on that,
that's my point. I was going on something, but then we got into technicalities. Anyway, we're elevating ourselves. We're focusing on the positive aspect, like procreation. Okay,
Yeah.
you want to have sex. Okay, so do it for procreation, and that's like the ideal, right? Might not be where everyone is, but that's like the ideal, what we'd like to get to, right?
Mm.
And so
Mm.
the whole point is remain devotional to Krishna. Keep adding your energy, directing your energy there, and then eventually, yeah, you'll automatically become detached because you're gonna fix your problem, you know, and the symptoms aren't gonna be what you think is your problem.
just as a matter of pedagogical consideration, it seems that our communities, we could do a lot better in communicating this distinction so that this conflation doesn't end up sabotaging so many relationships as it appears to be doing. And at least if the survey is to be believed, this conflation of like bhakti and, you know, proper standards of religiosity, I think there's a conflation there that's causing a lot of sabotaging in relationships. And so, I mean, it's just a sidebar. It's just a method of communicating that clear distinction that you can still improve devotionally despite being a little whatever, not up to the standard, which is another thing that I really would like to talk about too. But yeah, Karuna.
The essence of it is that we need to focus on positive progress. It's about what are you adding in? Didn't Prabhupada say, whatever you do, just add Krishna, you know? Just like it's about turning ourselves, the primary thing is turning ourselves towards Krishna, and the secondary thing is turning ourselves away from Maya. And because that is the thing, turn yourself towards Krishna, get love for Krishna. And the secondary, because 16 rounds is the positive. This is the do. You should do this if you want to move closer to Krishna. And then the 4 regs is the negative. Don't do this if you'd like to make it easier for yourself to move towards Krishna in the positive. If you engage in these things, in these indulgences excessively, then you will become excessively attached to your dying material body, and it will be difficult for you to genuinely attach yourself to Krishna. And just as a final point, essentially what it boils down to, I think a lot of people sit with this belief that whatever they're doing in the positive is automatically rendered invalid if they are compromising in the negative, basically. So like if regs are being broken, then whatever I'm genuinely doing is just suddenly invalid immediately. You know, and I do not think that is the case. I think it's more a case of like, this is the recommendation, or like, and Prabhupada mandated it because he knew that in the West, people are very, very attached to these gross forms of sense gratification, and they have to be, you know, very strictly controlled. otherwise, it's going to be very difficult for Westerners to make actual progress in bhakti. And then just on this point, Nityananda Prabhu made a very nice comment to what Jai Jagannath Prabhu is saying. We often see that when reading the regulative principles of bhakti, devotees usually assume Srila Prabhupada is referring to the 4 regs. But then, most often, Srila Prabhupada elaborates, chanting, hearing, remembering, etc. Just demonstrating that is truly, as Jai said in the beginning, this is the primary concern. What are the angas of bhakti? Focus on the positive.
One thing that I remember, man, I can't remember who posted this. Someone posted a commentary on one of the Goswamis on the Bhagavatam quote, the Nastya Preshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavatasya. They were saying that it's interesting, specifically that in the verse it says that by rendering service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, right? And loving service unto the personality of Godhead is established as an irrevocable fact. So the loving devotional service, they don't have to be completely destroyed for the loving devotional service to be there.
Right.
You can have loving devotional service even when what is troublesome to the heart is almost completely eradicated and not quite eradicated. So if this is the last, the final frontier of sense gratification, I mean, it's sex. Prabhupada says that it's the most potent energy in all of material creation. So why would that be likened, even though there's 4 regs, why would that be the same as stopping eating meat? Why would that be the same as gambling?
Right.
My ability to not gamble, so easy. So easy, right? But it's really like the most powerful energy. So I think it's also people being extremely tough on themselves and perhaps even minimizing the great force that sexual energy has, and feeling like, as you said, that it's in some way disqualifying them from having access to bhakti, even very advanced bhakti, which I think it's possible. Now, what I will say, and not that I'm a big fan of playing the devil's advocate, it's not my thing, but there's also the consideration of committing acts that we don't necessarily find are productive on the strength of the holy name, which is, I'm not really going to work on this habit. I'm not really going to try and improve. I'm just going to keep chanting. I think that it's healthy for people to have goals in relationships. I think that people, one of the questions, which was so brilliant, Kumari, that you wrote was, what do you see the progression of this being? What are your goals? Do you and your partner have a long-term plan for what sex is going to look like throughout the evolution of your relationship? And that's such an important consideration, because even biophysiologically, sex is not the same in your 20s, in your 30s, in your 40s, when you have kids, when you don't have kids, when you're older. Like, it's just not the same. Men and women rhythmically are different, right? And so it's so important to acknowledge that even if, these younger people, especially that answered our survey, they're like, it's great, I don't want anything to change. I'm thinking like, yeah, okay, but it will change. It will change. And are you ready for that? Do you have a plan for the evolution of your sex life? Does evolution exist? Or are you just, some people answered our survey very frankly. They were like, I would like this every day, very steady, just like my 3 meals and, whatever. Okay. But does your biology even match that?
Right.
Does your biology even match that? What would the maturing developmentally of a healthy sex life look like? And does it always look like the same sex I had when I was 22 and we were newly married and we were all psyched about each other? Or are there symptoms of a well-developed, mature sex life that look really different from that? I thought that was probably one of the most dynamic questions on the whole survey.
Brilliant. I wanted to, and this is coming a little bit back to the way that men and women experience sexuality, but this is a subset of that. Did you notice, and I certainly noticed because I guess I was looking for it too, that the porn question was more of a men's issue than it was a female issue? Now, that could just be maybe the ladies weren't being so forthcoming, because that's a pretty embarrassing question and one that men are expected to have a problem with. So maybe we're just like, yeah, there's an issue. I don't know what might have been a dynamics there, but I did happen to notice that some ladies did speak about it briefly, but for the vast majority, I noticed it was a male issue. And I'm talking about men who were in committed relationships or men who were married. That was an issue. As such, means that it was going on. Like, yeah, I watched porn even after being married, even after having a sexual relationship with my spouse, that was an issue. And I don't know. That's something that I definitely noticed, and I kind of wanted to hear some conversation about that. Like, how did you process it or hear that? And like, yeah, porn is like, and particularly how porn informed the way you have sex with your partner, which was interesting because a lot of the guys, at least the ones that I saw, and I looked at about 50 or 60, so I saw quite a few. A lot of the ones that I saw, they were saying that it informed their sexuality or the way they did sex. 4 out of 10. You know, I think there was only one that said 8 out of 10 that was like a little bit higher, but mostly I was saying like 4 out of 10, 6 out of 10. And that seemed like kind of problematic insofar as, at least when I was growing up, and I think it got much worse now. When I was growing up, the way women are portrayed in pornography is, let's just say, problematic. And so if you're having that being like the script that even partially informs how you engage with your partner, it seems like it could be a big issue. So I was kind of wondering, did y'all notice that, and what do you say about that?
Yeah, I think it's a little inevitable that's going to be an issue. And I did see definitely it skewed in the direction of men experiencing porn as being, negatively affecting their sexual relationship. And I think that this comes down to education, because it's children who are accessing porn. It's straight up children who are accessing porn. We're talking about elementary school, when your brain's not formed fully. You don't understand what you're seeing, right? And it's totally unrealistic, super exploitive. And porn in general, it's understood that porn is made for men. They are the topmost consumers of porn. So it's made with the male gaze. It's in mind, right? It's right. Designed to stimulate and hook the male consumer more so. I mean, obviously there are markets for it, but overwhelmingly, porn is made for the consumption of men. And so it's a very dangerous experience, because what I noticed on the other side is that the majority of the respondents who talked about trauma were women.
Yeah.
And so that seems like a very obvious formula, which is if men from a very young age are taught that violence and sex go together, that exploitation and sex go together, that false power and domination and stuff like that go with sex, and the victims of that are going to be women. And women talking about how their hangups coming into healthy sex relationships is that when they were children, they were victimized. And so that makes for such a toxic situation, because no one has a realistic experience of what healthy sex is. They only know what healthy sex is not, and they don't necessarily know that it's not healthy. So if we're not having like sex education that says like, this is what a healthy sexual relationship could be or should be, these are the components of people who use sex at a really high vibration, then when they see porn, they have something to compare it to, and they go, oh, that seems very strange compared to what I know to be healthy, like, nourishing, balanced sexuality. And when someone experiences victimization or knows of somebody, being victimized, they can also go, actually, I can't tell you how many people I've worked with that they'll tell me about a sexual experience and will put it within the framework of perhaps you were abused, perhaps you were victimized in some way. And I literally can see behind their eyes, like a little light bulb goes off where they go, oh, is that what happened to me? Oh my God. Like literally, there's not even the context of like, yeah, I was victimized. Like that was something that wasn't supposed to happen to me, and it happened. But because there was no reference of what should be happening, what is safe and nourishing, beautiful sex, this is my only context. And if sex is bad and this was bad, then maybe that's okay. I mean, we're like conflating and equating all these things. Right? If my spouse feels belittled in sex, that might be okay because that's what I see in porn. If I don't communicate with my spouse around sex and we just kind of do it and then disconnect and whatever, that must be okay. That's a standard because that's what I see in porn. And then that's what translates over into relationships. You see what I'm saying? It just becomes like the textbook for sex on both sides.
Right. If you as a man, because literally young guys in the world of today are growing up on porn. They look at it daily, a lot of them multiple times a day. And naturally, those highly, highly exploitative pathological sexual scripts are going to be etched into the consciousness. And then when you do enter into an actual relationship with a real human being, you will be almost involuntarily influenced by what you've ingested over years and years and years and years. And the fact of the matter is that, luckily, we do have people who are born into the movement, but even them, like no one, if you own a cell phone and you have an internet connection, everyone is equally exposed to this temptation of looking at pornography. Like no one is safe because it's completely anonymous, it's completely affordable, and it's completely accessible. So no one is an exception. Now, devotees, people that are converts and come into Krishna consciousness, being converted into it, still have all of this conditioning. Now, everything in life has a science behind it. Everything has a science behind it. This is how it's done properly. And Tantra, for example, as Nakul Prabhu is like on an absolute crusade to give people, Tantra tells us a lot about what is wholesome sex. Like, how do you go about it? How do you connect deeply? How do you take it to the metaphysical level? But don't even mention the word Tantra in general sort of devotee conversations. Oh, no, we're not concerned. Sex only for procreation. Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. Seed is planted. Okay, cool. No. It's such an intimate experience need to be regarded as being sacred. There has to be immense conscientiousness and sensitivity and an attitude of servitude in the act itself.
Okay.
And Danya's core point is there is no education around this.
Yeah.
existing.
So what does education look like? This healthy, I'm gonna say that there was one very hilarious survey where it was a guy and he was like, Hare Krishnas don't know shit about sex. And then that was one sentence. And the other sentence was because they just listened to sannyasis talking about the subject matter. And I was like, amen, that is a very valid point. And so obviously the education has to come from those who have had wholesome sexual relationships in the context of a marriage specifically and can communicate that to the next generation of devotees. But I'm still wondering in my head, we're the next generation coming up that's going to have to do this work clearly. And even if from the questionnaire, if that's to be, I don't know if you noticed this also, I noticed that the older generation of participants in the questionnaire were less forthcoming and sharing anything. And all the conversation was happening amongst our generation and younger. So it's obviously going to be our work primarily for the next generation coming up. So what is a healthy education this way? If we had to conceive of how it might be communicated, what would that look like? I'll tell you right now, my mom was legit. When I was 7 years old, I was already getting the topics, 7. My mom was talking to me straightforwardly, like I was a grown person. And because she was warning me, she was very nervous. She was raising 2 black boys by herself. So she was extremely nervous that we would come on the wrong path. So she started conversation with us very young about sex life. And it wasn't it didn't feel gross because we still didn't have a full reference point to understand. But I just kind of over the years I appreciated, 7, and then she was just very open, very clear, but she was still a mom. She doesn't have the full male experience, and then technology was just coming into the fray, so there was no way anyone could have prepared for that. But in any case, how does a conversation look like if you have to communicate? Hey guys, we're gonna do a seminar about how to have sex with your partner. Is it look like that, or what is it? In your head, if you had to conceive of a structure, what would it look like?
Okay, I got some stuff to say, but you guys go first. Braj, do you have any? Okay, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but Brajananda has been.
I thought he was asking Dhanya. Were you asking Dhanya?
Oh, okay. We're asking Dhanya.
Because it was her idea.
Yeah. Fair enough.
I was waiting for her to answer. That was my conception.
You're you think people should be educated? Figure it out. Well, I mean, can I share a response that actually was very much along those lines? There was one one response toward the end when we were asking people like, hey, do you want to add anything else? And I honestly, this is like one of the most heart-touching responses that I read. This person shared, a close friend pointed out to us that if we are having sex for children, then having a sexual relationship for our own emotional bonding is also for our children, because they benefit from being raised by parents who feel loved and loving with each other and seeing that affectionate example of a married couple. I can testify to that from seeing the reverse. And I was like, man, yes, like having sex for procreation is the strictly biological element.
Right.
But having sex and a healthy, affectionate relationship with your partner is an entire world that our children inhabit. Do you see what I'm saying? It's the energy in a house. It's the vibe. It's the intangible but felt sense that kids have of what is the bond between these two people. And of course it's expressed through sex, but it's also expressed through the way they talk to each other and the way they look at each other and their body language and how much quality time they spend together and what devotional activities they share with one another. There's a whole world inside of every house.
Wow.
So to say that all of that is separate from the biological act of like the sperm and the egg and they met and there's a baby, it's like, come on, dude, who could be that simplistic about anything? Who could be that simplistic about anything? It's so reductionistic. It's so reductionistic. It's about the entire world that you create. And this is just the procreation for children. There are many grihasta couples who choose not to have children.
Right.
And they're extremely powerful also, and they have their place in our society as well. So there's people that navigate that with a celibate marriage. It's people that navigate that with a progression towards celibacy marriage. You know, there's people in our survey that we're talking about the fact that they choose to abstain from sex during a pregnancy. There's people that talk about, you know, they choose to have it as a sort of compromise between how often one partner wants it and how often the other partner wants it. So I think, kind of getting back to the education thing, it's before we get to how do we educate our society, we have to formulate what is a home run of healthy grihasta life for our society. And how does sex fit into that? How do we create the whole landscape? And then how do we map that? Because if you just throw data at people, if you just throw information, or if you just throw a manual, it's this is how you do semen retention, this is how reproduction works, this is what contraception is, and then you just give people a bunch of tools and a bunch of information, there's going to be like a lot of feelings about that, right? Rather than saying, what kind of world do you want to create inside of your griha? And how does sex fit into that? Right? What does that look like? What does that feel like? And then how do we start? And then also, you know, like we were saying with that question that Kumari put in there, what's the long game? What's the long game with that? And how do we kind of mold that? Can we check in on that? So I think a lot of the education is more about like, where am I at really? Do I know myself? Do I know my partner? And what are we looking to do here before we start getting educated? Because the education is going to have to be tailored to each person's vision. So I think it's about creating visions. What is my vision for my griha? And then based on that, do I seek the education accordingly? And of course, that's going to take mentors. And of course, that's going to take resources and information and tools and all that kind of stuff. But there has to be a certain clarity, right? When you become a part of this ashram, you know, different ashrams have different missions, right? Just like different brahmachari ashrams have different sevas. They all have a similar ashram structure, but they're not necessarily acting in the world in the exact same way, even though they are the same kind of institutional item, right? Does it make sense?
Yeah. Perfect.
Oh my God, so much sense. Drop the mic. Word.
I got two things from that. One of the first things you said was very much starts at home, like the parents, and that affects the children. So there's more or less two categories of devotees, and some are devotees who became devotees later in life, not from birth. I started when I was 22, right? So then I have to relearn everything. So there's that category, and then there's devotees who were born into the movement, right? So what I see from what you said is that there could be education developing, like we develop a vision and education around how helping new devotees more or less learn about these ideals, and helping them incorporate into their marriage. Maybe it's through premarital counseling, or maybe it's something similar like that. And then it's those devotees develop the healthy relationship around that, and then passing it on to the kids. Like Jai Jagannath was saying, he was very young and his mother started talking about it, right? And you were saying how also that the relationship and that energy affects the children when they're growing up in the devotee house. Maybe you have some experience of that, and then that education could begin. Anyway, that was just two things that I got from what you just said that came to mind that could be possible ways about going into it, and maybe that's already going on to one extent or the other, and probably could be improved upon and more normalized, I guess you could say. I mean, I know a lot of devotees who never had premarital counseling or anything like that, and we did, and I believe honestly that we benefit a lot. Like, I believe the devotee who was our counselor, I mean, she set us up for success. I would 100%, like any devotee is getting married, I would say you should do this. So I haven't gone into the next. We haven't gone into the next phase, raising children yet, but I can imagine that that's where but these children could learn positive learned behavior and not the opposite of what we usually experience. Yeah.
Kumari, you got something on this? I remember my my mom, not my mom, in one of the questionnaires, he was saying there was one devotee who wrote a lot. It was like reading a little small book. And but it was at one point he said it's almost comical how parents or adults don't realize how much children eavesdrop. He said it's almost comical that how much they ignore the fact that children are actually absorbing so much. And so he was just describing some of the things that he heard growing up. Oh my God. It was just, it was so wild. He was talking about particularly
it was horrendous.
I found it hilarious. Like the Garberdamson Scar one. And then after, the seed is planted, the woman should keep her legs up for 30 minutes so the seed could travel to the I was like, oh my God, the ghetto. And he was saying this is stuff that he heard in the house growing up. And he said it's comical how people are just not aware how much is coming. So just dying to your point, it just makes perfect sense. Education really begins at home. Kumari, we want to hear from you some ideas around this.
Yeah, I think that, to have this education, kind of Dhanya was saying, like, you just give people the tools, it becomes so overwhelming. Like, sure, I have these tools now, but like, what do I do with them? So asking these bigger questions, like, how does our sex life fit into our home, and what does that look like, and how does that work for us as a couple? How does that work for us as a family in our home, and creating that ideal environment that we want based on our current space and our current point in our spiritual journey? Like, what does that look like? And I think that just sharing those questions. So posing those questions and getting people to think about it, whether it's through, just sharing questions, or if it's through premarital counseling. And I think that, so much when we were going through premarital counseling, it was like, we were sharing it with everybody that we were doing this and everyone should do it. And we wanted to drop this stigma from counseling. Like, there's like, we hear counseling, we think like, something's wrong, so I need to fix it. So I go to a person to help me, and no, nothing's wrong, but let's do it right. It's like from the get-go.
Preventative measure.
And so I think like helping people realize that it's helpful and it doesn't mean anything's wrong, and sort of dropping the stigma and normalizing counseling and normalizing asking these questions to make sure that we set each other up for success is so important. So important.
Just something that really stood out to me from what Dhanya said as well is that, okay, so Dhanya and I both work full-time as counselors or therapists of sorts, and I think Dhanya will attest to the fact that maybe the most essential principle as a counselor is that you need to be highly, highly attuned and sensitive to meeting someone where they're at, right? And you have to work from there. You can't have some sort of like, there's no question of having an agenda. There's no question of having some sort of bias of what someone should be, right? Like, you have to really listen. I just started reading a book called You're Not Listening by Kate Murphy, and it essentially points out that, like, you know, people really suck at listening to each other these days, you know, and the Hare Krishnas are no exception. Like, we're, you know, everyone is very, like, determined to, yeah, you know, say their say. But anyway, the point is, it's highly, highly, highly individual. Every individual, and then, you know, you bring two individuals together in the couple unit, right? And then they begin sort of like sharing qualities and natures, etc. Then that the couple unit becomes so much more dynamic, and every couple essentially, by, you know, by their both of their individual natures and their individual conditioning, and, you know, whoever they are, every couple creates kind of like a culture, you know, that within themselves, in their dynamic. And it needs to be, so Dhanya, your point of like, we need to all get really, really clear on like, what is our vision for the culture that we want to create in our Griya, and how and to be really realistic about it. Like, what is your nature? My God, you know, there is such immense variegation in people's natures on so many levels: psychological, physical, like spiritual ideals, what you're striving towards. So the fact of the matter is, like, okay, people, we need to establish a vision. Every individual needs to have their vision, and if they find that their vision is compatible with another, then they can collaborate and create a shared vision. Everyone needs that. But for people to get clarity on that, they need counsel. But it's so important that, like, people are being met exactly where they're at. And I think that there's just a huge, huge difficulty in that regard, because we are so, we're so indoctrinated with like rigid ideal standards, and anything short of that is not good enough. And everyone is, whether you're on the side of, whether you're being counseled or whether you're the counselor. This is our culture, you know, and we can't, like, if we're going to move forward, this is my personal opinion, we cannot continue thinking so black and white. There has to be a progression. There has to be a spectrum of sorts, because what is the question of meeting someone where they're at if there's not scope for a gradual progression towards the ideal, right? So it's highly individual, but we need qualified people to be able to really provide that counsel. Yeah. Okay. I said a lot.
We have to be qualified people. This is a little bit of a tangential. It's part of this same topic, because we got here from the porn thing and then education and creating a vision. Just this little bit of a sidebar. How do we hope to stay relevant enough to the next generation where they will appreciate our counsel? Because one thing that I got out of the podcast that we did last week with Kripamoy Prabhu and Mother Guru, which was an amazing episode. They're so funny. Oh my God. So charismatic. But one thing that Kripamoy Prabhu ended up saying is that every generation thinks that they're different from the previous generation. But the reality is that we're pretty much the same. And so the previous generation does have a lot of counsel to offer to the next generation on practical matters like the ones that we're talking about, or they could at least. But there's a schism that's happened between the present generation and the previous ones. You know, technology may have contributed and whatever. So just kind of just a sidebar, how do we hope to stay relevant enough to our children and that generation to be able to provide that counsel? I mean, we have a lot of competitors also now with technology. There's a lot of competition for that attention.
One sentence. We will stay relevant to the following generation if we cultivate the ability to genuinely listen to them.
Wow,
I'm down with that.
that's great.
Yeah, I
And,
agree. I mean, I think, and this is, we're talking about the ways in which maybe our culture bubble of practicing bhakti overlaps with the greater mainstream culture bubble and how they mutually influence one
Right,
another. But this
right.
issue that you're addressing, Jai, that's specifically our society's issue. Because in more realms than sex education, there is a difficulty or a frustration in the passing of the baton. Right?
100%.
Leadership, education, all kinds of things like that, visions for preaching, right? I've been a part of many a meeting where there is that disconnect between first generation and their concern for us to represent the movement and Prabhupada's teachings properly. And the second generation saying, I have ideas, but I can't implement them so long as you are dictating how things are going. And so there's that very protective energy from the first generation and that very a desire to stay very chaste and very pure to what they understand to be Prabhupada's teachings. And then also the second generation's desire and need to feel heard, to be innovative, and to be themselves. So I think that this translates, especially ISKCON-wide, more than just to the realm of sex education. I think that there is that fear on both sides and disconnect on both sides. I think that, there's that famous thing that we always throw around, which is like the best preaching is a happy devotee.
Yeah.
Because when you're a happy, fulfilled, joyful practitioner of bhakti, someone's going to ask you, like, what do you do? How do you, right? And so I think that you can feel, you said Kripa Moy Prabhu and Mother Guru, for example, who are just like so phenomenal. Doesn't it make you want to ask them, like, what do you guys do? Like, how do
absolutely,
you guys, right?
100%.
So for me, that seems simple enough, which is one of the biggest reliefs for me in my own grihastha life and in my own navigation of, my intimate relationship with Bali and motherhood and stuff like that, is to hear the positive experiences of other people I can relate to. Right? So how do we stay relevant is share those things that did work, because we are countered by all the things that are not working. Right? Like you were able to say, Jai, like, well, my mom was very frank and very open and very forthcoming. And that was kind of like a relief, because then when I heard things, maybe even misinformation, I'm like, no, my mom talked to me about this. I know. I had the same experience. My mom also from a very young age, I don't know if it's like a Latin thing, if it's a minority thing, but my mom was also very, very upfront, very technical, but also very kind of experiential, kind of informing me about, the experience. And we perhaps had a certain clarity because we were kind of gender aligned. It's like mom and daughter versus maybe you felt like she didn't get the male experience. But hearing from my mom what sex was, like one of the like standout phrases that she told me at such a young age, I can't even tell you how young, but definitely elementary school. She said, sex is only dirty if you make it dirty. And I was like, landmark statement, because you know what? Every single thing I've seen sex related since that comment, whenever that was, that's the bar.
Oh, yeah.
That's the bar.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? If I see sex and it feels impure, it feels disconnected, I'm like, oh, that was a choice. That it doesn't have to be that way. Sex can be connected. Sex can be beautiful. It can be nourishing. It can be all of these things. Why? Because someone that I care about shared their personal experience with me. So I think on a peer-to-peer level, that's so important. It's so beautiful to share. And I feel very lucky that in my generation and in my surrounding, there are many happy, satisfied, fulfilled couples. To hear how they navigate sex is invaluable to me. I learned so much from that. And because I value them as people, the information makes an imprint. The samskara is real. It's not just like some random Reddit thread. It's like, It's something I care about. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So
right.
it's about creating meaningful relationships, first generation to second generation to second, first to, on all levels. And then having the transmission of information be seamless because the relationship is there. Right? I don't want somebody who doesn't care about me telling me about my sex life, to be perfectly honest. I don't. So I think that care element it has to be there. It's fundamental.
Community.
Brilliant. You guys have any? I have a few more themes on my theme sheet. We've covered a lot, but I want to see there were some other themes that stood out for you in the questionnaire or the survey. Something that
I just wanted to just add something on a previous point, Jai, when you were asking the question, like, what would sex education ultimately look like at the end of the day? Like, there are still, okay, it kind of comes to this, like, whatever your particular vision is of how you're going to be incorporating sex into the greater culture or atmosphere or milieu of your particular griya, right? The fact of the matter is that, like, sex is still, like, the actual physical mechanical act of sex is going to take place, and there is a science to how one approaches that in a wholesome way. For example, in porn, it is portrayed that, there's no foreplay whatsoever which is directed to the pleasure and the service of the woman and her experience. It's purely directed towards the man. And so men are conditioned in that way, that foreplay for women is not required. But in order for a lady to have a satisfying sexual experience, extensive foreplay is required. People need to be taught these things, and there's ways of going about these things. So I think, for example, Nakul Prabhu, who was on our podcast, 3 times in a row, because we just relished engaging with him so much, because of his authenticity and just his confidence in his mission. I feel like Nakul Prabhu is he's really a pioneer in this regard. He's taking men into his semen retention army and meeting them where they're at, whatever their goal is, whether they want to be a brahmachari and retain their semen for that purpose, whether they want to learn how to have really wholesome sex in their committed relationship or whatever, and then he assists people in accordance with where they're at. But the fact of the matter is, yes, there is a science, there's mechanics to this thing, and people need to be taught these, like, basic principles, techniques, whatever the hell you want to call it. People need to be educated, and that needs to be done much more extensively. It should be a part of, like, premarital counseling, marriage training. Like, what is wholesome sex?
Y'all ready to study Kama Sutra? I know that. Well, the Kama Sutra, I know popular belief is like the sex manual, because there is a chapter dedicated to, like, sexual positions and so on. But actually, most of the book is about how to have a griha. That's what most of the book is about. How to do different samskars to have a successful griha, and what needs to go on in order to make the general atmosphere of the griha very dharmic and wonderful and healthy. And then there's a chapter dedicated to just those details also. So maybe we need to, not we, those who are grihastas and who need to be communicating this, need to study Kama Sutra. Anyway, I'm just throwing it out there. I don't know where these techniques are described therein.
Okay, does anyone have something? Because there's another, like, realm of our questionnaire that we haven't spoken about yet, which is contraception. But if anyone has any ideas or any particular,
we can bring it up. We can bring up contraception now. Just there's so many themes around that. I have to say, for the contraception topic, it was interesting for me specifically because, I'm not having sex, I'm not in a relationship, but it's like it wasn't even part of my world or my thinking about the subject matter whatsoever. So, okay, condoms I knew, but all the other stuff, like, someone gave, like, a long list of things. I was like, what the hell is IUD and this thing and the other thing and the other thing? What's going on?
I had to ask her
where those came from. I literally Googled, like, top methods of contraception, and I found a list and there's like 9 things and I just put them on there. So that's like what the world sees as the top methods of contraception, and that's kind of where those things came from. So, and then it was like people were checking them off, like of the things.
You know, I found it really interesting with the contraception. At least a lot of the, well, I wouldn't say a lot, but quite a few of the surveys I saw, there was like a belief that there should be no contraception on the one hand, and on the other hand, that Hare Krishnas, yes, they can use or should use contraception.
Yeah.
And I saw that, I just thought it was an interesting contrast, like to have a belief that contraception is not really good or not ideal, but then yeah, Hare Krishna should use.
I observed that people would admit to using contraception, but then when like the fundamental question came, like, should Hare Krishnas be allowed to use contraception, there was like a lot of ambivalence, you know, because it's almost like answering that question means like you make a final call on it, right? Like in principle. And I think no one feels, you know, sufficiently qualified or like, you know, sufficiently entitled to really deem such a question. But like the majority of surveys that I read, a lot of people actually said they feel it's okay to do it, right?
Right.
But perhaps in the context of the phase of their relationship that they're in, like a lot of people were saying, the majority of people were saying, like, we're essentially saying we are having sex because we feel it's a necessary, you know, release. It's something that we need to do. It's a need that we have. And whilst we're in this space, we need to manage it, you know, in certain ways. Because basically the point comes up that like, if you're not, because sex for procreation is like, boom, it's there. It's like the you know, the goal. But then if you're doing anything less than that, then you might as well use contraception, because if you don't want to make a baby, then you might as well be safe and extra sure that you're not going to make a baby, because maybe it would be highly impractical to do so, but you still have sexual needs to satisfy, right?
How do you think about this? I have to admit that last week in our episode, this came up also. I asked it specifically about a question related to kids and making kids. And it was brought up, and I think this represents the sort of traditional old world thinking about the subject matter, that if you're afraid of the consequences of sex life, you know, like children specifically, not that it's a consequence, but as it's thought of today, then you shouldn't be having sex. And I feel like that's what a lot of our generation receives from the previous generation. And so don't do sex unless you're prepared to live with that consequence. And the whole like sexual revolution and then the development of contraception, it has transformed the way we think about sex life tremendously, because otherwise previously that wouldn't have been an option. You would have just had to, I guess, take your chances or whatever. So like, to be practical, I feel like I'm good at meeting people where they're at personally in my personal interaction. I know my profile stuff is a little ghetto. It's a little out of control. But on a personal level, I think I'm good at meeting, you know, being very understanding, like non-judgmental and all that. So I don't think I would ever judge. I certainly wouldn't judge anyone for doing what they got to do to keep things wonderful and peaceful and blossoming in their home. But just as like a principle around contraception, I'm kind of interested in that part of the conversation as a principle. Good, bad, like how, yeah, that part of the conversation.
I think there's a little bit of just a practicality aspect to it. I think that even if you have the intention to have sex, to have children, likely the first times you have sex will not result in pregnancy, because that's statistically is just not how it usually happens. Sometimes it does, and you have a one shot and great. But most of the time, no. And so for some people, I think that it makes a lot of sense to navigate sexuality and build that relationship without feeling like, as I'm learning about this and as I'm building this, like a kid's going to come and then literally everything changes. So I can totally see how that would be, you know, a concern. And the other thing is, you know, if Having kids is not necessarily what's on the table at this time or at any time, and you still have a sexual relationship, you know, the Gita begins with commenting on the dangers of having unwanted children. And so what is the greater detriment to people and to society? Is it the use of contraception, or is it people who do not or cannot take care of children for whatever reason? And that's an enormous responsibility, and it's an enormous consideration, especially if in that relationship, one or both of the parents have this like heavy bent on detachment from family life while being in family life. It can be a really difficult struggle for those kids, and that feeling of being unwanted, or the home and the relationships not being structured in such a way to receive them properly, that could be a really big deal. So the counter danger to whatever drawbacks there may be for contraception, which is like, oh, well, I get to engage in this without fully contacting the responsibility of the consequences that can come from that. Okay, we can understand that might have some detrimental effects. Does it outweigh the detrimental effect of having a child and being unprepared and potentially neglecting emotionally or societally that child? I don't know, because that's like that's Arjuna's greatest fear, right? Which is what's going to happen to these women and children. So I think that's a really heavy consideration. And the other thing that I'll add in there is that whenever we talk about contraception, it is a gendered conversation.
Really? Yeah, I got a sense of that too.
Because, I mean, 2 of the 9 are things that men can do, like condoms and sterilization. And all the rest are on women. And it doesn't come without consequences, right? You might be able to slip a condom on and off and the rest of your day goes unaffected. But hormonal birth control, for some women, for many women actually, it takes an enormous toll on their hormones. It can affect them emotionally, right? Birth control is not always provided for free, depending on where you're at, and so it can have a financial cost. It's like a heavy conversation to have, and I don't necessarily think that the conversation that when couples have this conversation, it stems from a place of like, I just feel like being a little irresponsible and just not following up on the consequences of this. Like it's a pretty heavy thing, you know?
Wow. Thank you. Didn't know any of that. So it's very interesting information. Kumari, Brajananda, what you guys hear about this contraception thing?
It's okay. We gotcha.
I didn't think you were gonna call me next. I was just happy hearing what you all had to say. Yeah, it was what I noticed about what devotees. It was very interesting. Some devotees were saying that they use it, but they don't believe that devotees should, and then some were saying that we don't, but we believe devotees should. I thought that.
What are your personal feelings about it? Like, Kumar, you came up with the question also, which was an inspired thing, I think, that this should be part of the conversation. So I'm curious, like, what's your thoughts on this?
I think that these questions really stemmed from hearing a leader in our movement sort of say that, like, if you use contraception, like, you're engaging in sense gratification, essentially.
But
right. It was like a straightforward fact that, like, if you do that, like, that's what you're doing, right? So, but then it placed guilt on the use of contraception when maybe that's not the goal of it. Maybe it's to connect with your partner and to maybe you're not in a place, maybe you don't have the resources or the finances or the living situation to support children at this point in your life, but you're in your relationship and wanting to develop that and deepen the loving connection so that you can support children at some point in time. So I think that it's like, it goes beyond just, oh, if you use contraception, you're just like trying to have sex for pleasure. Like, there's so much more to consider. And then also just kind of elaborating on what Dhanya was saying about birth control, like, so many of these hormonal methods, it not only takes a toll on the woman, like, while she's using these hormones, but it also takes time. Like, you stop using birth control and then it can take a year, 2 years, sometimes even 3 to 5 years to be able to have children, for those hormones to go away. So like, these are like serious considerations that I think that you know, as devotees who want to have family life and who maybe are doing these things even before, you know, becoming devotees and not considering like the long-term effects, or not even knowing or understanding, or is from the male perspective not even hearing about some of these things.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I didn't hear about most of them either.
I mean, I learned these things because I studied women's health. So like,
She's a nurse. She's a nurse, so she knows these things.
Well, I think this is so informative though, Kumari, because it just goes to show how actually a lack of understanding around contraception is a symptom of a lack of a understanding of women's sexuality and women's cycles, right?
Mm-hmm.
If sexuality is understudied and under-talked about, women's sexuality is like the tiniest speck, right? The tiniest speck in this vast ocean of sexual information. So that's a big deal, because women, we don't know our own bodies. Men certainly don't know our bodies. So it's for example, like one thing that I actually recently became acquainted with, which I'm so grateful that I'm learning more about. I don't know a whole lot about it, but you know, the Catholic Church is very strongly had a position in the past against contraception.
Right.
And obviously Catholics still have sex. So there's a huge branch of research of Catholic proponents of non-hormonal, non-invasive birth control simply by studying a woman's cycle and understanding her bodily rhythms. Because the reality is, for the majority of women, for the majority of the month, we are not fertile. Right? It has to be like the perfect match of ovulation and conception, you know, like sexual intercourse for conception to happen. And so it's about actually getting to know your own body. It's like an app that you have on your phone, and it's women kind of studying their own body's mechanisms and seeing the symptoms and signs of when they're approaching ovulation. And so it's literally timing their intercourse according to that. And it's very much in harmony with their own rhythms. They and their partner have to take education courses. Like, in order to even get access, I think, to the app, you have to take a certain amount of classes, you and your partner. And so some of it is about your biology, some of it is their biology. There's stuff that you have to get. You have homework assignments and so on. When does she ovulate?
We need to take notes.
Well, so it just goes to show that, you know, what is it? Necessity is a mother of invention. Which is maybe the fact that, you know, there is this behavior will elicit me to become more educated about my partner's body and so if I have a strong pull because I'm not into using hormones for my body, or I don't feel comfortable using a condom, or I don't want to get an IUD implanted, or I don't want a vasectomy because of vasectomy, whatever. Okay, cool. But then maybe there are other ways in which inevitably, by trying to, let's say, you know, use contraceptive, I actually learn a bunch more about myself and my partner. So I thought it was like a cool kind of more holistic approach to the we don't want to get pregnant just yet, but we're still having sex kind of thing that is coming as a byproduct of how stringent specifically the Catholic Church is.
Right. Nice. I have a question, and this is sort of like I'm not trying to play devil's advocate either, although I am into it, unlike Dhanya. But this is not the purpose of me asking this now. But it's more just like in terms of our thinking about it. You know, in order for a community to flourish, it needs children. Like, that's an absolute fact. And one thing that's been observed, particularly in the Western world, is that we're not having enough children. And that's a cause of concern for certain individuals. And I'm just going to say it, in contrast, you have cultures like, and this is not me hating. I know I do a little bit of hating on my social media, but I'm not hating on this right now. You have someone like Islam, where they may have more than one wife, and they're encouraged, like it's preached in a lot of their congregations, at least I've seen videos like this, where they're encouraged to have 4 or 5 kids per wife. And so they're producing a lot of kids, and that way they ensure the survival of their culture and posterity.
Yep.
And so having children is like a critical aspect. Like, there's only 2 ways we can continue the Christian conscious movement. A, you have to be really good at preaching, collect devotees that way. Doesn't look like that's happening. So B, you need to have kids in order to continue the survival of the culture. And so I feel like in our generation, I wonder about this. and I'm what do I know? What can I see from my finite standpoint? But it does seem like the millennial generations, we're less into having kids, especially, and this is just an observation. It seems like the more educated we are, the less maybe inspired, or it seems to be that way. I can be completely mistaken. So I'm not trying to like create a paradigm of thought here. I'm just putting it out there as a question that we need to be having kids. And it doesn't always seem like that side of the conversation is nourished enough where they're like the embrace of having children, maybe particularly like motherhood. I don't hear anyone talking about the glories of motherhood. I never heard that so much. I loved my mom, so I just by direct perception understood the glories of a really good mom. But I never heard motherhood being glorified and the importance of that, the importance of having children, getting into a relationship to have children so that you can continue your culture. So on that side of the conversation, in relationship to contraception, I'd like to hear some thoughts around that too. And that may be considered a more conservative lens of the subject matter, but I think that's an important part of the conversation also. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Go for it.
Okay, I was gonna say it's confirmed. There's a paper by Rodney Stark about how a religious movement succeeds or fails. It's a very interesting paper he wrote, and I think it's like 10 ways, and one of them is to procreate. And like a religion like the Amish religion, they have lots of kids, and they're actually, believe it or not, one of the fastest growing religions. Like we don't see them much because they kind of keep to themselves in a sense, but they actually are growing quite fast
because they have kids, like a lot of them.
They have like 10 kids. Like
hey, they don't play. That's like progenitor level.
Yeah, they have a lot of kids. Like it's part of their like values and in their culture. It's like you gotta have a lot of kids. It's like everyone knows that. So it's definitely a big thing, and yeah, it could make or break the ISKCON, or I don't want to say this ISKCON, but just spreading of Gaudiya Vaishnavism is if we don't have kids, then it could really disable us in spreading Krishna consciousness and keeping the lineage going. So it's funny. It's like some devotees have like no kids, some devotees have like tons of kids. Like I have a few friends who have they're all about having kids. Just okay, when's the next one? When's the next one? When's the next one? They're gonna have like 10 kids running around. Some But I think it's very important, and it's it's hardly ever spoken about. Like you were saying, we don't like go to an ISKCON temple and they're glorifying motherhood and having children so much. It seems like a lot of times we get more of the renounced vibe. I mean, at least in my experience, maybe that was just because I was a brahmachari for 8 years, and that's just like my filter was there. But yeah, I generally have
the vibe. That's the vibe. It's ghetto. Okay. It's very renounced oriented.
Sorry, something out. But yeah, I think that's, and like you said, it's like if we're not making a lot of new devotees, then like we don't see most temples. I've traveled all around the country. I've been to every temple. It's like if you ask them how many devotees they made in the last year, a lot of times they'll be like, "Oh, yeah, like 5, 6, maybe less."
And that means they did amazing.
Yeah, it's like we did 5, right? Yeah, so it's actually that's really slow. If you ask a Christian church, like we went to Redding, Northern California, Redding, California, and we heard that one of the like fastest growing Christian movements is there. It's called Bethel Church, and they're literally like making like hundreds of devotees a year. Like there's people who move all over the country just to live there, and they're like practically anyone in the town is probably part of that church. Like one of my friends told me that, and we were staying at Airbnb, and I was like, I wonder if these people are. And I was looking around the apartment, and sure enough, I found a little book, and it was like what we would call like a bridge preaching book. And I look in the back, and it's like Bethel Church. I'm like, there you go. Like it's obviously a thing. Like these people are, making a lot of devotees, as we say, and they're also having children too. Like Christian families, that's a big deal. Like you have at least 2 children. Like I know growing up, all my friends at least had 2. And anyway, I'm just elaborating on like, heck yeah. I mean, that's definitely a big, like, it's studied. Like this is something that has to go on if you want to succeed in your spreading your religion.
And
Yeah.
I grew up. Oh, sorry.
No, you go for it, Kumari. I'm
Okay.
gonna go on a whole
I was gonna
thing
say
now.
I grew up in the Jewish tradition, and like I remember learning from like elementary school, like you're supposed to have 2 boys and 2 girls, and you keep trying until you meet that. So I knew this one family where they had girl after girl after girl after girl, and then finally like they had a boy, and then they still kept going because they wanted a second boy. So to reach that 2 boys and 2 girls standard that's like written out and taught and propagated, they kept going. And it was common in the community that I was in, and it was well known that was like the standard and like what you should be reaching for and the goals for that. And I think that this generational shift sort of is happening where even I see like older generation devotees, you know, they have a few kids or whatever, how many kids they have, an average amount of kids, and not all of them are practicing devotees, right? So then it's like, was that a success? Are they, you know, well adjusted in society? Like, how are they doing? Like, how are those kids actually doing? And then kind of going into this next generation, I feel like maybe that people aren't having as many kids, but I feel like the quality of kids is more of the focus of these new generation of parents. It's like, if we're going to have kids, we want to give them all the love and all the care, give them Christian consciousness in a digestible way. And if they become devotees, great. And if they don't, I hope that they're amazing, loving, kind people. And I feel like that's kind of where this shift is happening, not just in our society, but I feel like, you know, in society at large as well. Like people who choose to have kids kind of care about this quality factor.
Yeah, totally. I was also just wanting to emphasize that because Jai, you know, your original statement was something like, yeah, if we wanted to go on, then we need to be, you know, we need to be making kids, we need to be having kids. But for me, the big question lies is like, how are those children going to be received? Do we have a village in which to raise them? How are we going to be protecting them from the realities of Kali Yuga and a worldwide, you know, in ecological environment that is literally falling apart? You know, like how are these children going to be received? Are we sufficiently, you know, Nityananda Prabhu was just saying here, like, we don't glorify financial security, so many fear being unable to support a larger family. That is true. There are so many devotees who are insufficiently like situated to be able to really like, you know, live up to the financial reality. Kids are very expensive. And like, if we're going to be slotting into this abomination of like the nuclear family model, which is a complete disaster because people are so estranged from each other. You know, children take an immense amount of work and dedication. It's like, it is, I mean, Dhanya, like when Nama came, like the amount of like Bali was just, you know, when Dhanya and Bali were on the podcast, he was deeply moved by seeing Danya's dedication to Nama and being there for her, like every single second of every single day, continuously, you know, uninhibitedly with no, but you need to be a really well-grounded, well-situated person to be able to do that for your child, right? If you're dealing with issues and all sorts of things that are not in place, if the foundation isn't there, if the grounding isn't there, you're setting that kid up to get traumatized. Like, no doubt about it. right?
Well, that's kind of
I
part of
just-
my question. Then that all that you're saying. 100% agree, and that's kind of part of my question. Like, if we want to have sex, and this is, by the way, this is the devil advocate's position. I'm not really bringing that Bob though. I'm not really bringing that Bob here. It's just a matter for conversation. If you want to have sex, get that together, because this is a natural sort of byproduct. And then we're bringing this up in the context of contraception. So I'm just sharing that side of the conversation, which seems to be a side that is also important before, when deciding to use something like contraception. Like, don't just leave out this side of the conversation completely and only focus on this one part. Like, this is also a big part of the conversation. Like, we have a community, and what if I do have a child? I am going to want a village to raise them in, which means other members of the village got to be having kids too. So there could be a village to raise them in. So that's kind of where the spirit is coming from. That's kind of the spirit.
I think it's actually such an important talking point, because it threads through a lot of the other stuff that we were talking about in our conversation. You know, you were saying, like, why don't I hear motherhood glorified? You know, I would like to hear more of the glories of motherhood. And it's frankly because if leaders don't glorify mothers, who will? And if mothers themselves are not in positions of visibility and leadership, how will you know what they do?
Right.
Until you guys asked me what was my experience as a mother, I didn't necessarily have a platform to share it on. Until you asked Bali about his fatherhood, he didn't necessarily have a platform to share it on. So the fact that there's conversations being had about it, that there's visibility of parenthood, that there's praise of parenthood, that there's acknowledgement of parenthood and what is wonderful about it, it doesn't make sense necessarily for a sannyasi to have access to that information. Although people in leadership, even if it's not your ashram, you can still glorify what is glorifiable about someone else's ashram. So I think that there could be a greater emphasis on glorifying mothers, because they're the center of the whole situation.
Right.
And speaking of that, yes, I don't necessarily think it's devil's advocate to say, yeah, if you want to have sex, then you should consider, you know, expanding the movement through having children. However, we looked at the survey and we saw in our very simple, non-strategic sample size, okay, all of those smoke and fire things considered, we saw that there was a big emphasis on the men feeling a strong urge to have sex, and the women feeling a less strong urge to have sex as often, let's say.
Yeah,
okay, if we can make that generalization, then I would say that it's on the men to create an environment where, if you want to have sex, create a world in which welcoming a child would be fully supported, because men have power, and men have money, and men have leadership, and men have visibility, they have voice, right? And so, okay, if you want it to happen and the majority or this big pressure of having sex is coming, then make a world where that's possible. Use your power, use your voice, use your tactics, use your money, use all of your masculine Shakti to help create the village. Because if you don't do it and you leave a mama unattended and unseen and unsupported, not only will she not want to have your kid, she's not going to want to have sex with you either. So set it up. Set it up is what I'm saying. What I'm saying is set it up. If we want this Krishna consciousness movement to thrive, and our preaching considerations are, we could be like the, you know, like the Islamic tradition or like the Amish tradition. You know, someone actually answered on our survey, describe what sex means to you, and they said procreation of sadhus. That was an answer. It's literally,
I saw that.
It could be a sadhu factory. It could happen.
That's cool.
But what does it take to make it happen? It's not the sex. The sex is the easiest part. The sex could be literally accidental. Make it happen, but make it happen for real. And honestly, the onus is on the men. Support who you need to support, become who you need to become. And then, you know, let's show up to create this village, as Kruno was saying. Let's show up and create this village, but the people who are in power have the greatest responsibility for that. And meanwhile, let's uplift women, let's protect children, and let's give visibility to the glories of what a beautiful, like, Grihastha family life could be, right? I mean, it just connects all the points that you guys were talking about, the different highlights of the survey, and it gives practical steps like, okay, what can be done then?
It's just such a, you know, I don't want to be like, Okay, I'm just going to point out a particular reality. The reason why this podcast exists is because there fundamentally, Dhanya, as you're pointing out, there is fundamentally a lot of responsibility that men need to take, but men, unfortunately, are hella lost, you know, because there are very, very, very few worthy role models in most men's lives, that like role models that are close to them, that they can consult with, that they can interact with, that they can have loving, trusting relationships of guidance with. This is a huge issue. So yeah, I mean, the onus is on men, but dang, there's a lot of like, you know, general, there's a huge gap that needs to be, you know, leaped over. And I really hope we can do it, guys, because I mean, this Krishna consciousness thing we got going on here is pretty special, you know, and we gotta keep it going on. And for that we need our villages. Like, that is an irrefutable reality.
Right.
Anyway, we have, you know, I'd like to perhaps, unless someone has something else to say about this, but I'd just like to bring in this one aspect of like, what was each of your personal investment in conducting this research? Why did you feel it was relevant to you from your personal experience?
I'm gonna go
'Cause
first.
we haven't really. Yeah. I wanted you to go first because you're like. Yeah. Anyway. Okay.
Sorry, it being like kitty. My personal, I think every generation has to define their own individual mission and contribution to the greater mission. You know, so like the first generation of devotees, it was like they're pioneers getting the movement going. And so their work is not necessarily going to be our work. Our work will be different than the previous generation. And I think just like children have to like come out of the house and discover their own identity outside of the house, as a generation, we have to discover what our particular mission and contribution will be to the greater Christian consciousness movement. So having that as a preface, I personally feel that part of the missionary work and administrative work that we're going to have to do for our own community and for the world, and this is going to sound really cringy, but it sounds too new agey for me, but I'm still liking the word healing work, healing of schisms. And I think the sort of push towards, like, I see a lot of devotee content creators specifically, they're really into like this sort of connection between psychology and spirituality, you know, because there's been a schism between like a healthy mental person and spirituality. There's been that schism there. There's been schisms between sanghas that's been very destructive. There's been schisms between genders on account of so many factors. So I feel like part of the missionary work our generation has to do is healing these schisms so that the future generations may continue in a healthier environment in order to prosper. So I just saw this sort of conversation, this sort of work around sexuality as an important schism that needs to be healed in our general community. There's something very weird and awkward around sexuality and spirituality that's not healed, and it's causing a lot of sabotaging in our community, like the success of our communities, because as you say, it's an indubitable fact that you need a village in order to have a successful mission. And that means you need healthy families, which means you're going to have healthy individuals who have reconciled their sexuality to their spirituality. And so my personal sense of it, even as a person who's not in a relationship, who's not likely to get in one this particular life, but in whom a lot of people confide about their relationship stuff, I just saw it as like, this is one of those areas that really needs to be healed. And so let's get the conversation going. Let's let the world know that even someone like me who's not in a relationship is very invested in seeing the success of relationships. I get a lot of joy in seeing my friends' pictures of another year. You know, it's like, for me, that's a time of celebration. I know it's a time of celebration for them, but it's also a time of celebration for me. And so that's my personal why I wanted to get in. I'm like, this is important to me also. I want to be able to go to some other part of the world and check out the village, see the beautiful kids chanting and dancing, seeing the success of the community. That's going to be important for me as a person who's not even in a relationship. So that's where I was coming from with this. I feel that's our work, killing of schisms.
Yeah, 100%. That's a really, really Brahminical vision, that's like the Brahminical benevolence coming out there. Braj, Kumari, you guys. Hello. Are you still there?
Oh, I think it might have
Did they freeze?
Oh, they froze for me.
Okay. Are you guys back?
Braj, Kumari, are you guys still there? Hare Krishna.
Oh, we can hear you.
We hear you.
They don't.
There, I hear you guys. Oh, but I don't know if they hear us. Oh,
yeah,
no.
they don't hear us, it seems like.
Snap. Okay, they're gone.
Okay, Dhanya, your turn.
Sorry, I had to run and pee. I've visibly been hydrating, and the consequences of that became unavoidable.
Right.
So I apologize for that. But yeah, I kind of echo what you're saying. Like, I'm invested in being part of part of a community that thrives. I think I've said this before about other things, but the services where I see myself, pitching in my 2 cents like this, or like child protection, or counseling and that kind of stuff, it's because literally I will not be able to function in this society without this. Like, I need support for my marriage, for my kid. I need support for my devotional life. Like, it's partly selfish in that I need to be a part of a community that's healthy. So if there's any way that I can contribute to that health, let me put my 2 cents in, and let me become educated in how to give, and let me give my kid the best chance that she can have, and let me give my spouse the best partner he can have. And so part of it is strictly selfish in that way. And the other thing is, I want to be able to, another big part of the service that we do is kirtan. And I want to be able to travel and preach and share the holy name with people and bring them back to like a home community they can look forward to being a part of. It's embarrassing for me to feel like I don't know what I'm bringing them to. I don't know what experience they're going to have. I don't know who they're going to talk to at the temple. I don't want to show them X, Y, and Z. I hope that they don't do a Google search. Blah, blah. That for me is it's really sad, and it's not what I would want, because to be quite honest, my personal bhakti experience is that the things in our culture and the things in our philosophy are so incredible that I actually want to run to people and show them the things that I've seen and that I know and that I've experienced. We have to upgrade every other element around that to give people a home that they look forward to living in. Otherwise, I want to have a home that I look forward to living in. I want to have a village to raise my babies in. So I'm invested, all right? I'm initiated. I'm in. Like, I'm totally in. So whatever upgrades need to happen, I feel very much the responsibility that, like, if I see something, then it's probably because I have to do something about it. Even if I'm not qualified, even if I make all the mistakes and the smoke and the fire thing, just get on it, because I'm already invested. I cannot give up Prabhupada. I cannot give up ISKCON. I cannot give up what I know. I just know too much. I'm hooked. So now it's just about like upgrading it, because I also I'm not into like the martyr thing where I'm just going to suffer in the thing and you know what I mean?
Right.
I don't know if that makes sense, but I feel like you get it.
Yeah, I get it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, Braj, Kumari, are you live? Can you hear us?
Can you hear us?
Yes. Okay.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Can you hear us?
I hope we can. Yes.
Oh, okay. I know. I think we popped out for a minute.
Okay. Personal investment.
what's the question
Personal
again?
investment in the mission. Yeah. So basically, like, what was your personal inspiration to be part of this?
Oh, well, I mean, like you said earlier, you and I were just talking about. I think we were more or less talking about what we think is missing, or what was it? We were just talking about like problems devotees are struggling with, and how they're able to overcome these problems when conversations arise around them. And arise, right? That's yeah. When they arise, the devotees feel like they have power to overcome the issues that they have, like to get rid of the shame and the guilt and just say, you know what, I'm okay. I'm going to do better. I'm going to keep going, not just fall in the ditch and, falling in the ditch. That's, no one wants to do that, really, inside at least. I mean, so giving them, like, creating conversation, just talking about things that people don't talk about, but we all have inner talk about, right? we all deal with these things, right? So, and then this came up, and I was like, when I was doing this project, and I was trying to find some statistics or something. I was trying to find
some Hare Krishna data.
Yeah, Hare Krishna data, like social studies, basically, of the Hare Krishna movement.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find anything anywhere. I'm like, okay, like,
I remember that.
Christians have so much. Like, if you look in I had to actually base a lot of my, I don't want to go on what I was doing because it would take a long time to explain. But Christians had a lot, so I actually pulled a lot from them because I figured it might be a little similar on a smaller scale. And it just gave me anyway, the whole point was like I get a grasp on one concept I was trying to explain. So we didn't have any data on anything, and then I was like, somehow it came up about sexual values and how no one really talks about it, and I said something like, well, wouldn't it be cool if we had like a survey we sent around? And then Kuru and I went back and forth, and then he said we brought my wife into it somehow. I don't remember how she got involved, but anyway, she somehow got involved, and we were like, who wants to make the survey? And Kumari's like, I'll make it. I studied making surveys, and she did it. I feel like I really relate with what Dhanya said about creating the village, investing in the village that you want to see. I mean, the truth is, like, even us, we've moved a few places since we got married to try to find that village, and it's hard to find a village that you want to be a part of, and just creating that village together in our own household, and also in whatever realm of influence we have. That's my investment, and being willing to have conversations with other devotees. Like somehow or other, a lot of devotees reach out to me to talk about things, and I do the same with other devotees too, and we just relating with each other and talking about things that generally isn't talked about, or maybe they don't have anyone to talk about it with, and it creates deep bonds and trust. And I feel like that's really what I want in my life. I want to have deep, meaningful relationships and trusting relationships that I could drop, like if I had a child, I could drop them off at their house and I'd be like, they're fine, they're taken care of, no worries. I trust this family, they're healthy, they're sane, So anyway, that my investment was just wanting to see a better future. And like Jai Jagannath said, each generation has to really deeply consider, like, what is going to be my contribution to the Hare Krishna movement. So I vibe with that entirely. That's why I'm here. I want to live in a awesome devotee world, and that's my selfish motive. But I want to see other people too.
Kumari,
other people, like Dhanya said, bring them back somewhere that I believe that they would have a great time being in. So yes.
Right.
Yeah, I of course resonate with the whole village concept, and I think just a more of a present investment, navigating my relationship, navigating my own personal baggage. I mean, that's my like little selfish investment. And then more so than that is not that this survey created the navigational tools for this topic, but that it lended toward honesty and openness and just beginning talking about these things that are not discussed, and that being the start to better navigation, to increase quality of relationships, increased understanding of what's going on, and the ability to talk about it.
Chai. Well, we good start, guys. You know, I feel like it was a good start. Like, yes, riddled with imperfections, but I think here we are having a really meaningful, constructive discussion about core issues in building our extended community. So I take my hat off to all of you, and I'm so grateful to all of you for being a part of this. And you know, for myself, I can say, I think Jai and I have we've created a podcast that, like, I need to hear these conversations. I need to hear them, but I'm not hearing them. So like, we're gonna have the conversations for that purpose. Like, I feel so so often I've had this experience on Arise where, you know, we have guests and they, you know, they share their wisdom, and then I feel like the amount of times that I've had this like really uncomfortable feeling of like, oh my God, I am like a prime I'm like a prime receptacle of what is being, like, I really need to hear what's being said here. You know, there is a lot of you know, there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of baggage that one just circumstantially has to deal with if you come out of like the really degraded Kali Yuga culture, and then you know, enter into this diametrically opposed culture of, you know, divine principle and everything. There's a lot of stuff that you've got to deal with on so many levels, and you know, certainly sexuality is such a big deal for everyone. So, you know, I have a lot of things to reconcile. I have a lot of, you know, questions on my mind. You know, it's like, I am, for example, a excessively affectionate person. You know, like I need like a lot of like physical touch just to feel emotionally kind of grounded and satisfied. You know, it's just something that I require. I'm very I'm just very sensual by nature, so it's like, and it's just really hard to reconcile that in the sort of like devotee context. I don't know how to deal with it. So, you know, it's a lot of like personal investment. I feel like everything that I just said was super sloppy, but anyway, it's fine. It's late. It's almost 11 p.m. and I'm kind of tired. So I hope that there was some sense that came out there. Just
There
one
was some
final
sense.
point though, is that I just feel like, you know, it's absurd that basically everyone is dealing with certain issues. What is most, like, Damodar Prasad came onto the show and he said this one thing that has stuck with me so much. What is most personal is most universal, right?
Yeah,
and it is absurd
powerful.
that basically everyone is dealing with the same issues, but everyone's talking about it in private. Like, everyone's talking about it to their
Maybe.
gurus. You know, they're coming to like agreements and figuring things out and whatever. But meanwhile, the sort of public reality is something completely different. And I think it's ridiculous that everyone's dealing with the same issue, but we're not having a public conversation about it. So anyway, I guess this is the beginning of a few things. I'm done rambling now. My heart is full. I'm super grateful to all you guys for making this possible. Yeah, literally each and every one of you played such a key role. And anyway, thank you. And thank you everyone for being here with us and for listening. You know, like, what we couldn't do this if no one was willing to listen.
Jai.
Jai,
Don't
thank you
worry,
so much.
we'll be here for the next show also. We decided our agenda for this first show was like, can we just keep it up for a year? And for those of you, I know a podcast appears very simple. It's literally just someone talking or a conversation going, but it's hard. It's really hard to do it continuously. And the fact that we were able to do it for this year, hats off to you and I, Karuna Avatar. That's been amazing. And the fact that you guys have found value in it and reciprocated with this very humble endeavor is amazing of y'all. So we will be continuing next year. There will be a small break as Christmas, New Year's, and all that, and we'll be meeting during that time to discuss how we're going to go about the next year to make this a better offering. But thank you all for being there on this journey with us and giving us the continuous encouragement to do so, and private messages and coming to the lives and sharing messages with us. It's been really inspiring, actually. And I get inspired, but I'm kind of in a little bit of a heavy mood these days also. So the continuous inspiration is gratefully received, honestly. And thank you so much for that. Jai Ho.
Haribo. Yeah,
ho.
so expect us. We'll probably be back like mid-January, as I'm guessing. I'm gonna be pretty engaged until anyway. So we'll be back mid-Jan. We don't know exactly with what, but like we're gonna set our minds and intentions to it. And if anyone has any like feedback, please DM us. I'm Jai's Urban Sage Deliberates on Instagram. I'm __ Karuna with a C and then another __. And so please share your feedback with us. And we really love and appreciate. And I just want to say, like, JJP is the dopest podcast co-host like in the world. Like, he's always got me. Like, he's always like making up for, because what he does, right? Like JJP, this is what he does. Like, he's prepared every time. He's got the questions. There's no lacunas because he's always on top of it. And I'm on the spontaneous platform. I just roll with it. I wing it. I listen and I respond spontaneously, and I'm all emotional and sentimental and stuff, and Jai brings like that, like straight up intellectual Brahminical edge. And I just, man, you feel like my other half, bro. Thank you so much.
Jai, likewise.
Okay.
Later, fam.
All right. Wow. This was definitely our longest one. So thank you everyone for being with us. Hare Krishna.
Thank you all.